Whenever I close my eyes, I see him laughing again, saying that I'll never be able to make it on my own, that I'll starve in the streets and come back begging him to take me back, that I can't do anything without him, and that's why I'll never really leave him, that I'll have to be guided and disciplined like a stray dog. He wasn't always like that. He was sweet before he started making more money than I do. Then the humiliation started. He told me to know my place, to quit my job because if I was going to make a puny salary, it was better that I only took care of the house and of him. He didn't hit me for the first 3 years of our relationship, and before the verbal abuse, there were no red flags that I could see. I spent over 6 months working odd jobs in secret so I'd have enough money to leave. It's not that I had a bad relationship with my parents, but I didn't consider relying on them because they had raised me to be independent. But I did, because not everyone has this privilege, and they'd die to have the opportunity that I had been choosing to miss. Because admitting you need help and accepting that you're worth of being helped takes some courage and grandeur too. So when he threw me out in the rain, holding all the last 4 years of my life in a small suitcase, I went to them. Mom and Dad were always good to me, but emotionally distant. They'd expressed their love in more subtle ways, I suppose. Still, they hugged me tightly for a long moment. Then Mom prepared my favorite comfort food, and, after I ate it, Dad grabbed some blankets and put me to sleep on the couch, as he kept watch the whole night, sitting on the armchair beside me with his gun next to him. None of it really matters now, but that's the story of how a 25-year-old freelance writer ended up affording to buy a small and old, but otherwise really nice farmhouse. I always fancied living alone in the countryside, somewhere peaceful but not too remote, where I could have my own chickens and work in silence, and still see my next-door neighbor in the distance, and only need to drive 5 minutes to my local farmer's market. My parents helped me finance this marvelous place. The floorboards creaked in some places, and all the doors needed a good oiling, but the house was solid. With an old-time charm it was hard to find these days, and it even came with a cow. The house was 3 hours away from where I used to live, with him, so I felt safer. I was ready to start again. Mom and Dad spent the whole next day helping me move and make small repairs. "Didn't the ad say the house came with 50 chickens? There's only 42, my mom informed. I couldn't help but laugh. It was very like her to count chickens when there were more pressing things to do. "They probably meant roughly 50, Dad replied. "But 42 is roughly 40, not roughly 50. "Or you could have just miscounted them, Mom. All chickens have pretty much the same face." When the night came, Dad got us some takeout for dinner in the nearby city. We ate between boxes and dusty furniture. "Will you two stay the night?" I asked, as we had our meal. The house had a master bedroom, a smaller bedroom that I planned on using as my home office, and a third one that needed a lot of work before someone can use it. They looked at each other, and I could almost see the engines working inside their brains. Staying meant that they would have a horrible night's sleep, as both were severely allergic to dust, but maybe I'd feel more protected and at peace. Not staying meant having some decent rest to drive back the next day, and maybe I'd feel independent and strong, but maybe not. "I think we'll just go to an inn in the city," Mom finally replied. I nodded. I was ready to spend my first night alone, and I was about to find out that I wasn't alone. I don't even know why I went into the attic that night. I was exhausted, and all I needed was to take a good shower and go to bed early. I guess I just wanted to take a good look all around my new place and feel satisfied that I had somewhere nice to live. My Orcus, finally! A very high-pitched voice scared me as I let myself in. Startled, I tried to grab something to defend myself. Whoa! Stop this shit, she added, and my silly weapon, a loose piece of wood, fell from my hand. I shone my flashlight in her direction and saw a magnificent, if extremely odd, female. Her crimson hair was styled like a 1920s diva, matching her brilliant vermilion dress, full of elaborate embroideries. Her light brown skin was gleaming, but covered in black scales on the shoulders. Her face was beautiful, but you could see a pair of fangs partially covering her pouty lips. Her eyes were weird and mesmerizing. She had feline pupils, 2 narrow slits almost lost in the immense pale pink of her irises, and long, thick eyelashes that made her the prettiest woman I had ever seen, despite the fangs, the stained shoulders, and, oh my god, the scaly, dragon-like, ragged wings. It took me a while to realize that her bare foot was like the hooves of a goat, and that her hairstyle almost covered 2 curled black horns. The tips of her fingers were black too, and covered in dried blood. I just watched her for a while, not knowing what to do. Her presence didn't feel menacing, just imposing. She then smiled and whined like a queen. Come on, feed me. I've only had 1 chicken today. Automatically, almost like I was under a spell, I went to the hen house to get her some food. When she finished eating, she introduced herself. My name doesn't matter. It's too dangerous to say it aloud anyway. But yours is Melinda, right? She asked. I nodded. Well, girlfriend, your house was cheap because it's haunted. But luckily for you, I'm the Empress here, so the lower ghosts won't disturb you as long as you follow my rules. Be smart, and you can have a happy life raising your calves or whatever. Are you ready to hear them? Don't only nod like a dumbass. Yes, I'm ready, I hurriedly replied. Rule number 1. You'll feed me 2 raw chickens every day. I don't care where they come from. But if you don't give them to me, I'll wreak havoc in your little farm and eat all your hens and any other animals you have. And then I'll be unwilling to be nice with you for a while, which means Flying Head Stew will visit your dreams. Right, I quivered, but I could live with that. Rule number 2, no people sleeping over. As the master of this house, you have some privileges, but not your guests. You can have visitors, but if they're here in the darkest hours of the night, I'm under no obligation to be nice to them. So I will draw little dicks on their foreheads in permanent marker, and grab their foot and their tongue to jolt them awake, maybe sit on their chest for a little sleep paralysis fun if I feel like it. And don't even get me started on what legless Linda will do to them. I laughed a little. Hearing about the other ghosts made me feel uneasy. But somehow, I knew that I could believe her, that they'd leave me alone unless she said otherwise. So that was fine too. I didn't plan to have my parents or friends stay the night, and if I ever got another boyfriend, or girlfriend, we'd just hang out at their place. So far, she sounded playful, relaxed even, but then her face became somber, and her seriousness was so eerie that made my knees tremble. For a fraction of a second, I considered that maybe he was right, and I couldn't do anything proper on my own. That I was putting myself into a situation far more horrid than the last abuse I went through. When she spoke again, she sounded like a whole different demon. Rule number 3. I never make noise, even when I roam around. The others are quiet too, except for the eventual pot falling in the cupboard in the middle of the night. So if you ever hear footsteps, it's not us. In that case, the only safe place is your bed. Cover your head and wait until I tell you it's okay to come out." Her pupils contracted even more. I might be a beautiful, ancient, and scary demon, but there are far greater dangers in this world than me. My first night in the house was quiet, except for the sound of water dripping in the sink. I got up to check it and decided to install a new tap in the morning. My parents came back around 10 a.m. to check on me one last time. Told me they were really proud and went back to their place. Mom remarked that now I only had 41 hens and that I absolutely should ask for some of my money back. I then saw them off and headed to the nearby grocery store. It was almost time to feed my demon tenant, and I didn't want to kill another of my poor chickens. As I was checking out, the old cashier/shop owner started a conversation. "Two raw chickens, huh? You must be the kid who bought old Lou's ranch." Speechless, I just agreed and nodded. Lou was the deceased father of the sellers, and they'd been eager to get rid of his haunted property. Did Lou tell this old man about her? "No need to worry or explain yourself, lass. Everyone knows that place is strange. Do as you see fit to protect yourself," he winked. "Also, if the raw chickens are back, I'll give you the same deal I had with Lou. It'll be too expensive not to buy them in bulk, right?" I hadn't considered that yet, but I immediately felt grateful for his thoughtfulness. "Don't buy them from anyone else, and you'll get a great price from me. You'll pay weekly for what you pay for 6 of them here, and I'll deliver them to you, frozen. Rest easy. Lou never had a problem doing whatever he was doing with thaw chicken," he smiled. Mr. C, as he introduced himself, was a very fatherly type, with a snow-white beard and gentle blue eyes, always partially covered by a worn-down beret. He seemed to be truly worried about a young woman living alone. Having him check on me every 7 days didn't exactly make me feel safer, but it was nice to know that someone cared. He even brought me some cookies made by his wife every now and then. My only recurrent visitor made sure to never enter the house. Every Sunday morning, Mr. C honked his delivery truck's horn 3 times and waited until I opened the automatic gate. Then, parked keeping a safe distance from the house, going exactly far enough to pet my goat Lilibeth. Then, I went upstairs to feed her the domicile lunch. My fellow demon mocked Mr. C for his fear, but then praised him a little for his wisdom. It's weird to say that, but I didn't think too much about Pandora. Since her real name was Forbidden, that's how I nicknamed her. She was a graceful housemate, so except for her meal times, when she was always incredibly snarky, I was completely unbothered by her presence. I was even happy that she was there, but it was kind of in the back of my mind. Humans are indefinitely adaptable. We can get used to virtually anything and don't give a second thought about it. For that reason, I can say that things went smoothly pretty much all the time. It was only after 2 months that I had the first incident involving Rule 3. I was washing dishes for breakfast in the kitchen, feeling carefree and even a little proud of myself. Earlier that day, I'd managed to milk my cow Marybelle for the first time, and drinking it fresh was great. I was humming a song when I felt my left ear go suddenly cold. Before I could even think about it, a voice whispered to it, "Melinda, sorry to bother you, but the master tells you to go and hide in your bed." This ghost sounded exaggeratedly goofy, like some Jim Carrey character. I started looking for a dishcloth to wash my hands. "No time for that, madam," a second voice announced next to my other ear. I felt my body lightly pressed towards my room. like 2 pairs of hands were trying to move something really heavy and just barely succeeding. I knew I was in trouble when I heard very slow but heavy footsteps coming from the living room, like a fucking giant had entered my house. "Go!" Voice number 1, the goofy one, urged me. As soon as I turned to go to my room, I caught a glimpse of something horrific reflected in the cupboard's glass. A huge, bluish and deformed face with evil lupine eyes. It opened its mouth like it was ready to devour my body, my soul, and everything else around. Like there was nothing but endless void and suffering inside this creature. "Close your eyes or it will be too late," voice number 2, who sounded like an old lady, warned me. "We'll guide you. Hurry!" Goofy voice instructed me, and I complied. Running to a specific destination with your eyes closed is harder than you think, especially when you're really scared and naturally clumsy. I stumbled on some furniture and heard a few things falling and crashing, but I didn't care. I wanted to follow rule number 3 at any cost, not only because I trusted Pandora and hated breaking other people's rules, but mostly because what little I saw from the beast was enough to know that it would give me a fate worse than death if I didn't. I lied in my bed, covered my head, and pretended not to exist, breathing as little as possible. "I hope our aid was satisfactory," the old lady said politely. "The master can't come and help you at these times because she has to prepare for the battle, so she sent us." I nodded, not daring to talk. You could hear horrible roars and the unmistakable sound of fighting, even through the decent muffling of my blanket. I twitched every time I heard the heavy, destructive movements. "What is that thing?" the goofy voice asked, astonished. "And don't worry, madam, the enemy can't hear us. We're pretty much talking telepathically." "Oh, you weren't here yet the last time he came," the old lady replied. "The master calls him the captain. He comes twice a year, hungry for souls. He almost got the former landlord when he got too old to run to the bed. The poor man barely left his room this time of year." I was too scared to even open my eyes, so I lost track of time, but I'm sure they spent at least 20 minutes fighting. I've never been so grateful for not having close neighbors. Imagine having to explain all that ruckus to other people. Then Pandora appeared in the threshold, holding a scimitar and all covered in a deep blue and sticky substance. "It's safe to leave, housemate," she announced in high spirits. "You should have seen me there. Never mind, it would get you killed horribly. Anyway, look how his stupid blood stinks." She put one of her armpits next to my face and laughed. It smelled of sulfur, of course, but the blue patches in her skin had an even worse smell, like a spoiled egg had a baby with a sewer. "It will take forever to clean it up with my powers, so I'll have to do it the old-fashioned way. Get me your best towels, and I'll help myself to your tub." I obeyed, leaving the room to attend her request. I was pleasantly surprised to see that my house was intact. All their fighting took place immaterially, so nothing was damaged. I remember thinking that I'd get Pandora an extra meaty chicken for lunch, and that she was actually a good person. But I was being horribly naive. Things started to go south when my cousin Alyssa decided to make me a surprise visit. Pandora knew I enjoyed a quiet lifestyle, that my only visitor was Mr. C, who knew better than to enter the house, and that my stern parents would rather slit their throats than show up unannounced at someone's house. Alyssa and I weren't particularly close, because despite being my cousin, she was several years older than me, so I saw her more as an aunt. She was that member of your family that always ends up taking care of the elders, or who cooks for you when you have a horrible flu. The type of person that would always go the extra mile for an act of kindness. Unfortunately, this extra mile almost cost Alyssa and I. I mentioned before that my property has a gate, but it's more of a glorified fence. Just a short thing that keeps the hens from escaping to the road and prevents that cars get too close to run over my animals. In other words, it's pretty easy for an average adult to jump over it. I was still in bed when she crossed the small gate, one of the rare occasions that I wasn't yet up by 11 a.m. because I had a migraine that had been lasting a few days. "Damn it," the already familiar voice of old lady ringed in my ears. "Stay there and cover your head, madam. Something's wrong." I complied. I didn't pay a lot of attention to the footsteps, as they weren't particularly heavy or scary. The front door opened with a thud as I heard two feline voices yelling. "You fucking bitch! No one allowed you in!" Metallic noises. "Shit! What is this? Ugh!" I recognized my cousin's voice as the second woman. Afraid to break Pandora's rules, I asked my bodyguard ghost to immediately explain the situation and asked Pandora to stop. "Melinda, are you there? It's me, Alyssa." "Whatever the fuck happened?" she cried a little, 2 rooms away. "I just brought you some food because your mother said you had a migraine." I can't recall a time that I felt worse for someone else's kindness. I ran towards the entrance and saw my really nice cousin all disheveled, sitting on the floor with a line of blood running from her hairline to the side of her face, protectively holding a casserole all draped in a pretty dishcloth like it was her newborn son. One of her eyes was black and swollen, and my heaviest frying pan, a cast iron, sat sadly beside her, slightly deformed on the farthest side of the room. Pandora stood menacingly, still holding her usual weird weapon and growling like a rabid dog. "Bitch can't hear or see me if I don't want her to," Pandora informed me in a very scary tone. "Tell her to call beforehand like a normal person, or at the very least stand by the gate, unless she'd love to lose her stupid head next time." She then disappeared. A part of me wanted to scream in frustration at Pandora, but well, horrible supernatural things roamed around the house. Given the situation, I won't say that she was wrong to attack anyone who entered our property uninvited, but she could at least show regret for hurting someone innocent and unsuspecting. Besides, it would be really hard to explain to Alyssa why I was yelling at the walls on top of everything I had to deal with. I helped my cousin get up and convinced her that she absolutely needed urgent medical attention. I apologized profusely and started putting my shoes on to drive her to the nearest hospital, but she just shook her head sadly. "My mom is in the car. I jumped your fence so you could open the gate for us to let her in because the doorbell didn't work, but for now, I guess she'll drive me." She placed a casserole in my hands, defeated. "I'm so sorry, Alyssa. Thank you for being so kind. I hope we can catch up some other day." I awkwardly circled around her, trying to come up with some excuse as to why a 6-pound skillet went flying straight to her cranium the moment she entered my house. "It's okay, honey," she managed, but we both knew none of this was okay. "I think some houses are just like that. They reject people. I'm glad you seem to be unhurt here." "Thank you, Alyssa. What can I do for you?" "You take care of yourself. I saw a suspicious truck taking some leaps near your farm," she replied. As soon as her words entered my brain, I realized all the horrible things that could mean. I started to hyperventilate. Great. Now I, at the very best, gave Alyssa a concussion and made her worry about me over something she told me.
Oh, it's not him, she quickly explained. I saw the driver. It's a way younger guy, like younger than you. It's probably nothing, but please just lock your doors and leave alone whatever force that's controlling your house. I nodded, feeling a little calmer. She squeezed my hand and started to leave. And maybe get a priest to sprinkle some holy water around here? The world seemed to spin 10 times faster as Pandora screamed at the top of her lungs, "Come back here again, and I'll kill you, stupid bitch." And judging by how Alyssa twitched in fear and ran across my yard without looking back, I knew that this time my housemate meant to be heard. We were both sour when I went upstairs to feed Pandora her lunch an hour later. Her because someone violated her rules, me because she was being unnecessarily mean and putting me in a hard situation. "Good afternoon, asshole," she gave me a callous greeting. "Just leave my next chickens on the kitchen table and I'll grab them myself. We won't be on talking terms for a while." My eyes filled up with tears, but I kept my dignity and I didn't say anything. If someone enters your yard and you have a violent dog, it's your fault that the person got hurt, right? They had no business trespassing, but you can't blame the animal because it's just its nature. The stupid one was me for thinking of a demon as a friend when she was more of an intelligent beast. It's funny how the human mind works. During daytime, I kept busy and even felt more joyful than not. But as soon as I lied in bed, I started having a bad panic attack. It happened for a few nights after my cousin's incident. I was at the same time worried about my family's reaction, frustrated at myself for treating a demon like I'd treat any girl around my age that lived with me, and scared about possibly being stalked. "It's okay, madam. Soon she'll act like nothing happened and be nice to you again." Old lady tried to comfort me. It was the first time that one of the ghosts had talked to me without being ordered to by Pandora. "Shh, you don't know. You can't talk out of turn. The master can hear all of your thoughts," Goofy voice whispered, unconcerned. "It's fine, stupid head. She's not home." Although the friendly ghosts did their best to help me, my nights were restless, filled with cold sweat and waking up screaming. 5 nights after our fight, I was in the middle of a nightmare, sweating and whimpering. Like in the most of my horrible dreams, I was being stalked and tortured by my ex. Then his face turned into a younger man I didn't know, but they never stopped hurting me. Suddenly, I felt half-conscious, like a light state of sleep paralysis. There, housemate. Have better dreams now, will you?" Pandora spoke softly as she patted my head like an older sister. Lubbery, but with nice intentions. And I felt her weight get up from my mattress. Her gesture was incredibly sweet. Still, I couldn't help but notice that her hand smelled faintly of blood and rotting flesh. I almost couldn't believe I'd had the guts to confront her, but I did it next day. I needed to know if she was attacking more innocent people that didn't break her rule. "Where were you last night?" I asked as I entered the attic. "Being nice to my roomie," she replied with a bright smile, exaggeratingly feigning innocence. "I didn't do anything weird to you, though. I wouldn't unless you asked me to." She was mocking me, offering to be my friend with benefits to dodge my question. That sly devil. "I mean, earlier, I heard you weren't home," I insisted. "That's silly. If I could leave this crappy shed, what the hell would I be doing here? And even if I could, it's none of your fucking business, nerd." "Your hands smelled of blood," I remarked. I had just learned to discern all of her moods. 1, being really mean. 2, just playing around. And 3, acting evasively out of uneasiness. It felt like the last option. "It always does," she winked. "And of corpse," I added. She then poked her forehead with her index finger so violently that I swear she created a bullet hole on it for a second. A silvery and ethereal substance in the shape of a tiny circle floated from her fingertip, and with a soft, waving movement, she threw it inside my temple. It felt cold and fluffy. "Take this, and you'll see some memories of mine in your sleep. I hope you're happy for being a fucking brat." I looked forward to dreaming of her past, so I even went to bed earlier in my best pajamas. I didn't know what to expect, but I wanted to know more about her. Trigger warning: sexual violence, suicide. The dream was pretty clear and in first person. It started with me seeing myself in a mirror, large with an elegant frame that was clearly expensive. I saw Pandora's face, even prettier than now. She looked somewhat younger and human. No horns or black patches of wings. And her eyes sparkled with joy, something I never saw before. I admired my reflection, approving my outfit that consisted of tasteful fishnets, gorgeous hand-embroidered lingerie, and a silky corset. I then took a little time examining my exaggerated but beautiful makeup, my perfectly done hair and fantastic high heels. I felt confident, with legs for days and a gracious catwalk. An effeminate man in a top hat hurried me to the stage. So Pandora was once human, and a showbiz diva. She was an incredibly talented performer, not only singing and dancing impeccably, but also brimming with alluring charisma. No one in the audience could take their eyes off her, and it was like the other dancers were just part of the furniture. They did everything right, but they can never shine as brightly as her. It's hard trying to explain how her body moved. Everything felt so natural, like it was born of nothing else but this moment. Try to picture a mix of Nicole Kidman and Moulin Rouge, Christina Aguilera and Burlesque, and Liza Minnelli and Cabaret all at once. I saw flashes of myself as Pandora on the stage many times, but when the curtains went down, she was always a nervous wreck, chain smoking and isolating herself from the other girls. After I witnessed so many of her glorious moments, feeling thrilled and proud, we suffered together when her worst fears came true. Her grandfather and brother invaded the stage, took her from it by force, the only place where she belonged and ever felt happy, and her beautiful eyes were never the same again. Being a cabaret dancer was considered utterly scandalous back then, especially by her conservative family. The old redneck had raised his 2 orphan grandkids, the boy to his likeness and the girl to be everything they hated. She wasn't born for that prospectless life, so she boldly dreamed of conquering the city lights. The 2 men kicked and punched Pandora all the way back to the farm, calling her a disgraceful whore and every name under the sun except for the thing that she was, a star. When the 3 arrived, they threw her in the hen house where she had to survive on raw eggs, corn, and other scraps they fed the chickens. She had to spend weeks in some sort of compartment under the hennery insulations, a compartment where their waste and loose feathers fell into it. It was barely 20 inches tall. All the while, they had long discussions about what to do with her, like she was just an inconvenient piece of dirty trash in their path. I was so mad. They went out of their way to ruin her dreams, and literally over nothing but their stupid and ridiculous pride. First, they considered marrying Pandora by force, to have her be someone else's problem. Then, establishing that she was probably impure by now, they decided she needed penance. So they kept her tied to a pole for 10 days and 10 nights, naked and filthy, being fed just some soybeans once a day. She talked to the chickens to avoid going crazy, and she still dreamed of going back to her stage, even if it was only possible through violence. Her skin bled from harshly rubbing against the rope as she struggled to keep her muscles working, to make sure that someday she could still dance. Nothing drove her but anger. That's how malnourished and nearly dead as she was. As soon as she was released, Pandora went on a rampage and strangled her grandfather. His soft, age-worn skin easily gave in to her hatred like wet paper. He barely had time to scream hoarsely and horribly before his eyes bulged out and his body became still. Afraid to be incriminated, her brother buried the old man's corpse in the woods near the property. Maybe if he wasn't an addict, he would let her go. He'd pretend that she didn't exist. She'd then go back to the cabaret, take some pills and whiskey every night to put herself to sleep, and momentarily forget that all she had gone through so far. She'd tremble all over when she wasn't dancing, but still do her best to keep her demons under control. But the worthless redneck couldn't keep a job, so he'd at least have money to drink himself to death. "Since you went and became a slut, you might as well make some money for me," he said, as he physically, literally, put her on a leash, afraid she would murder him too. And oh, she would. I cried in my bed as I witnessed all the terrible violations her body and mind went through. She spent 2 long years like that, having to take clients for her brother. The bastard just wouldn't die, and by then all the dreams had fallen from her head, leaving her feeling empty and dry. The only thing that kept Pandora alive was the idea of vengeance and seeing that she outlived her parasite of a brother. She didn't have any plans for what to do with her life after that, as she was now too ugly, both on the inside and on the outside, to come back to the cabaret. She just wanted to punish her persecutor. Then one day, after one particularly unspeakable abuse, she broke. She grabbed a shard of glass and was ready to bleed herself to death. That's when the creature showed up in front of her, seeming to paralyze time. No one else moved or spoke but the newcomer and her. The thing looked both like an elephant and like a fat pig. Its body was bulbous and scaly at the same time. It had long horns, twisted many times, and a giant tail made of fire. "I come on behalf of Orcus, the prince of the Underdeath, and we have an offer for you," he announced. "I'd do anything, I just want my freedom back," she replied, and the thing gave her a joyless smile with its mammoth-like mouth and fangs. "You get your revenge, kill whoever you want, bathe in their blood, and no one will ever know what happened. You'll be allowed to carry eternal vengeance, reanimating your brothers' and grandfathers' bodies as many times as you see fit to torture and kill them again," the thing menacingly read from the long scroll. "Then you'll disappear without a trace. No one will remember that you even existed. For all purposes, you'll spend eternity, neither dead or alive, as property of Orcus. You'll become a demon, chained to this place, having to survive on raw chicken and whatever humans or other things, dead or alive, you might desire to consume." Pandora signed the scroll without a second thought. By then, she knew it was the only option she had. She didn't hope to return to the stage, because 2 years is a long time in the showbiz, because she was tainted, because there was nothing for her except for washing the sorrow from her heart with the blood of everyone who did her wrong. She'd only learned decades later that Orcus rejoices on offering horrible deals to desperate people like her, so they can give him their soul and improve their still miserable existence through violence. She then carried out carnage that not even Stephen King could put into words. She hunted, tortured, and killed every last abuser, every last person who could have helped her but didn't, and people she'd never even seen before. Still, I don't blame her, and I'll never blame her. Fictional women who are abuse survivors are pictured as badasses that grew and became strong because of their suffering. But Pandora is real. She's not Sansa Stark. She has every right to feel nothing but hatred after her spirit was broken for pointless reasons. She has every right to become the only thing that she could. A pulsating mass of fury and heartache. A monster. A demon. A being almost as evil as the men who did this to her. The day was almost breaking outside when I woke up. Startled, and with my sheets and pillowcase dripping wet with tears, I heard her laughter coming down from outside my window. I then heard a horrifying scream that I now knew very well. The exact same scream that her grandfather let out as she murdered him in my dream. I don't know why, but one of these days I asked Pandora if she wanted to watch a movie with me. She seemed pleasantly surprised. Don't go thinking of me as a human woman, okay? But I guess that would be cool. We watched it together in the living room, Pandora saying ahs and oohs for everything. Just then I realized that no one ever treated her like someone that might have interests or would want to see the world. Now that I knew that she did, I both wanted and had a duty to give her some exciting things to do. After I dreamed of her tragic story, I saw some flashes of her with previous owners of the farm. Lou was the only one who ever lived peacefully with her, but he never approached her the way I did. Maybe I'm the fool, but I didn't like the idea of just tolerating each other. After that day, Pandora started to spend her days binging every single movie, sitcom, and anime that I could find for her, and she thought that everything was great, no matter how cliché or low effort the story was. Since she didn't need to sleep, eat anything but the 2 daily raw chicken meals, or do chores other than to protect the house from invaders, Pandora went through the streaming service's catalogs in a heartbeat, and I soon saw myself going back to old-fashioned, illegal torrent. Her daily routine consisted mostly of watching a bunch of things, then, after dinner time, having me watch her favorite thing with her so she could make comments about it. I thought this was really sweet. Being a binge watcher myself, we often spent hours in that activity, and I think that's when she really started to warm up to me, in her own demonic way. Pandora? Yeah? I love you, and you're my best friend. She laughed. Her face said, you don't have to be extra nice to me just because you know I have a tragic past. Okay, nerd, but I'm your only friend. You're lonely and lame. I laughed too. If she was mocking me with such gusto, it meant that she was feeling at ease. Can I ask you something? She nodded. What would happen if I hypothetically one day got married and had kids? You'd be lamer. I mean, about the house. First of all, you only go outside in those ugly jeans, so you getting a man is not a real threat, she smiled. But I think you'd better sell the house. I'm unruly, you know. I can't promise not to harm more than one person at a time. It's not a demon's nature. Would you be fine without me? I asked, truly concerned. She laughed again. Bitch, I've been here since your great-grandmother was a cutie, and I'll be here forever. But, thanks to you, I'll give the next owner a fourth rule. Get me a Netflix subscription, or I'll kill you. We didn't talk about the specific details of Pandora's past, as I didn't want to be hurtful or rude. It must have been really hard for her to even share all those memories with me. I didn't ask a second time about what she did when she left the house. But not the property per se, as she couldn't. According to what that strange demon told her, I assumed that the putrid smell meant that she had been reanimating her grandfather and brother to beat the shit out of them again. But I didn't really know how or where she kept the bodies. I can only assume they are buried somewhere around the farm, because her nails are always full of dirt when she comes back. Many of you suggested that I told her about my ex, but at that point, I felt the exact opposite. How can I tell a woman that went through all the 7 hells that I lived in fear for my life because the man I trusted humiliated and slapped me sometimes? I'm not downplaying this kind of abuse. I knew I had every right to suffer, and I knew that I had to leave him, but when compared to her, it was a smaller problem. He hadn't tried to contact me at all this time, and Pandora would attack any intruder anyway, so I thought it was best to leave it at that. In other news, I bought her a pair of expensive flamboyant shoes, and was waiting for an opportunity to gift it to her. I also started renovating the 3rd bedroom, using any spare money and time I had available. I wanted to decorate it in a way that looked like a stage in a fancy dressing room, so she'd feel at home there. And to try avoiding getting any more people attacked by Pandora, I had a personalized warning sign made in the nearby city. For your own safety, do not trespass. The house itself might hurt you. Ring the doorbell. If it doesn't work, call me. Regarding my poor cousin, I called my mother to ask about her state daily. Luckily, Alyssa's concussion didn't leave any permanent damage. Her eye was swollen to the point of not opening for a few days. Then her vision was blurry for a few more, but other than that, she was fine. Even the awful bump in her head was completely gone after a few weeks. I imagine that Pandora didn't hit Alyssa with all her might because she didn't seem particularly menacing, or because the trespasser was a woman. I felt horribly guilty nonetheless, especially because the casserole was delicious. So I spent roughly 1/3 of my monthly income sending her nice stuff like a fruit basket, then a chocolate gift basket, some sunflowers, they were her favorite, wines and cheeses from my local farmer's market, and even a balloon and plush bear holding a heart that read "Get well soon." Since she was always the one doing kind stuff for others, I hope that being a little pampered once could make up for the awful incident at least a little. However, I'll admit that the confrontation always made me panic, so I avoided directly talking to her, and to my judgmental aunt, like the plague. Unfortunately for me, one day Alyssa's mother was at my mom's house and they called me. I was taken by surprise and couldn't avoid talking to her. I hate sisterly bounds and schemes. She lectured me for half an hour about how dangerous it was for a girl to live alone in the woods. "It's not in the woods, Shelley, it's a farm, and you know it's pretty close to town," my mother corrected her in the background. Especially in a damn haunted house. And that if I was in such a financial pinch, she'd help me sell this awful thing and find a decent apartment to live. Aunt Shelley made nonsensical suggestions, like having me stay at her place. "It's less than 2 hours away. I could really use a bridge partner when Alyssa leaves, and my guinea pig will love the extra company." making all the family pitch in to help me buy a property that's not haunted, pawning her grandmother's heirloom, and even that I immediately find a husband so I can move in with him. Come on, Shelley, you know she's been through a lot. Or a wife. Wow, Aunt Shelley. Thanks for being a progressive crazy person. I said I appreciated the concern. Honestly, I didn't. But I was really happy there. She then said that maybe the house put a spell on me to make me think that I'm happy and insisted that I leave it immediately. She'd even help me pay the rent. My aunt isn't a bad person, and I know that this came from a place of worry, but she can be a handful. Talking to her, or rather, listening to her long monologue with my mother's director's cut, gave me an awful headache. Both my writing job and the chores of the farm were relatively taken care of, so I indulged myself in a marvelous, aspirin-induced, late afternoon nap. I woke up to a sound that can only be described as a tank invading my yard. Holy shit, it's the Colonel's army! Goofy voice announced, sounding really concerned. Sorry for the language, madam. Please stay very still and quiet. We'll have to go this time, Miss Melinda. It's all hands on deck today, old lady announced gently, then yelled like a general, Flying head stew! Legless Linda! Burn face! You're allowed to act today! It's hard to describe the noises that followed. What you could hear the most were the chains and the moans of agony. It was like all the souls of the damned from the whole universe decided to hold a conference in my yard. Then Pandora kept yelling things like, How many times do I have to tell you that that son of a whore colonel isn't here? Just go to the fucking light, you morons! As she dashed with her strange-looking longsword, clinking it against the chains. And then there was Legless Linda's laugh, among some of the other strange noises that I couldn't identify. She sounded like, and I think she was, a particularly vicious old witch. It took Pandora over an hour to come fetch me, something that had never happened before. Ugh, I'm beat. Let's watch that super silly musical again, she announced at my doorframe. What happened? I asked, concerned. It wasn't like me to ask about her business, but it was mostly because she could deal all right with the other invaders. We sat on the couch and I put grease on for us. Menaces that are pitiful are the worst. Did you know that this used to be a farm with over 1,000 slaves? I figured this land probably had slaves, but I couldn't imagine how many. Of course, this used to be a way bigger farm, extending to the neighboring properties too. But the slave owner's mansion used to sit right here where we are, including most of your yard and the hennery too. I nodded. When slavery became illegal, that horrible colonel invited all the slaves he had at the time. I was able to count at least 80 for a banquet at the mansion, supposedly. What actually happened was the racist scum locking them inside and burning the mansion to the ground, because he thought that, if not to serve him, they didn't deserve to live. It took me at least 20 minutes to let that sink in, and I'm not ashamed to say that I broke down crying. My brain couldn't process such cruelty, especially because, since the government didn't offer any aid for the recently released slaves who had literally nothing, most pro-slavery farmers, when forced to release their slaves, ended up just hiring them for pennies, and they lived pretty much the same life, but now legally as free people. But this colonel didn't even think that they deserved that infinitesimal change for the best. He was evil and rotten. For a time, before even me, they had been returning. No one knows when they'll show up. It could take months, years, even decades for the next raid. But they always come back so full of sorrow and angst. They're so blind that they firmly believe that the colonel is still here, and they want to destroy him. That's understandable, I replied. Yeah, I know all that because every time their chains touch me or my underlings, we see and feel it all they went through. That's why the battle is always so slow. This, and because I avoid destroying them completely, so they have one teeny chance of just moving on and going to the frigging light. That's awful, I whimpered. So the colonel's ghost is not here anymore? Nope. Went to hell or wherever else a long time ago. Isn't it unfair how he gets to move on with his afterlife, while these people have to suffer as spectrums? They look so awful. All burned down, pieces of their bodies falling as they move. And it's not even only the 80 or so that were burned. All the slaves he ever owned want to destroy him, and we have to fight more as the first ones fall and more enter the property. It sounded like a tank entering the yard, I remarked, still fighting back the urge to cry over all this senseless cruelty. Oh, that's because some of their forms are so mangled and wry that they fused with their chains and with each other, working as a vehicle for the ones that are, more or less, in one piece above them, she explained. We watched the movie in silence for a while. Pandora seemed more relaxed because she started letting out small laughs and muttering, "Her hair is ridiculous," every time the camera closed in on Sandy. On my end, I was still trying to process these incredibly dark pieces of information. Pandora? Is it okay if I give you a little something I bought? Is it an extra chicken? I'm good. I just eat them because of a contract. I shook my head and grabbed a brilliant pink box that I had been keeping hidden for a few weeks. I then got on my knees to help Pandora put her brand new shoes on. Shit, what are you doing? We can't get married. She seemed truly concerned that I was going to propose. I laughed and showed her a pair of very artistic, flamboyant high heels. Something that Lady Gaga would wear, but in a more affordable price range. I'm still only a writer with a mortgage to pay after all. It was weird to choose the ideal size because she didn't have toes, but then I figured that with hooves it was way easier to wear extravagant heels, since those always hurt your toes the most. She was so happy she even started criticizing every hairstyle in the movie with more scorn and gusto than ever, and she never took them off. Melinda. Yeah? I suck. She seemed like she wanted to say I'm sorry, but couldn't bring herself to do it. She seemed to be gathering some courage to go ahead. I shouldn't have attacked your relative. It's just that her mentioning the P-man and the H thing. I inferred that she meant the priest in the holy water. Those really hurt me, you know? And the others too. It's physical torture. It won't banish us to the house. No. These very grounds. Well, it's time Lakota tells you all about the complicated shit that's way above my pay grade. Lakota? I screamed as a tall Native American, older female in typical clothes and braids suddenly materialized in the living room. Unlike the other ghosts, who had names like Legless Linda or Burnface that suggested a lethal injury, neither her name nor her body carried anything suggestive of her cosa mortis. Lakota was beautiful in a sense, like an old and intelligent aunt you looked up to. Everything in her suggested a strength that wasn't unlike a force of nature. She looked calm as the eye of a hurricane. She carried herself in a manner of a wise and compassionate leader. "Hello, kid. I'm what you call a shaman, and I've been tied to this place as an eternal observer since before your people first walked these lands." Her mouth didn't move, but I could hear her pleasant and energetic voice inside my mind. "You see, the leader of my tribe, contradicting the belief of nearly all the other Sioux, didn't think there was an afterlife. To him, the only way to put our souls to rest was tying them to a piece of land that was specifically made for the dead. A cemetery for your spirit, one could say." I nodded. It sounded like something that would go terribly wrong. Over the millennia, that ended up creating some sort of magnetic field that attracts lost souls, especially the ones who died wishing for vengeance. A drain for those that are neither alive nor have crossed whatever there is to cross. And, most of all, a raft that brings on journeys in the outer planes end up using as a patch, or as a door to wreak havoc in the world of the living. "To sum it up," Pandora intervened, "your place is cursed as fuck."
I asked Lakota a bunch of questions. She was the most knowledgeable being I'd ever met when it came to history and old witchcraft, but she didn't know much about anything else. After all, the poor lady had lived many centuries ago. She explained to me that there were 2 types of resident ghosts in the house. And then came the third, Pandora, a unique type. The first 2 were the ones like her. They were natural observers, tied to the land itself, so they could move around a little, pretty much the only nearby properties. They couldn't fight, but their very presence provided as much balance and protection as possible to the area. And that's why it didn't have an evil atmosphere, and why supernatural intruders appeared once a week or so, instead of swarming my place every single minute. This group was a vast minority. Except for Lakota, there were only 3 others, and they were shamans too. I asked if I could meet them too, but she explained that they very rarely interacted with anyone but themselves, not even the other ghosts. I could try, but she was the spokesperson of the group. The second group was there because of the drain. They died in resentment and hatred and became wandering lost souls. The house, that is the epicenter of the distortion caused by Lakota's tribe leader, provided the only variational frequency that was comfortable to them. Those ghosts, like Goofy Voice and Old Lady, were technically able to leave the house, but if they cross the limits of the property, they either have to be ready to go to the actual afterlife, or their spirits will be dissipated in energy and assimilated by the land. Unlike the shamans, most of these ghosts don't have a lot of mind clarity, and they don't recall much of when they were alive. They mostly remember the circumstances of their deaths, most of them tragic, as you might have inferred, and the reason why they seek vengeance. I asked if they were able to move on eventually. Over time, some ghosts have graduated from Sioux Manor, so to speak, Lakota said. Pandora interrupted her to explain that this is how most of them call the house.
But most refuse to leave until they can have their vengeance, and most times it's not even physically possible anymore. They're all simply too lost and confused to realize they have a choice. Have you done something to help them? I asked. Lakota sighed. The other shamans and I are guardians to the land, not to its people. So we can only go as far as to talk to them, hoping to pass down some wisdom that leads them to enlightenment little by little. I nodded. Now, regarding our Pandora here, it's a special case, even among all the peculiar stuff I've seen in my long life here. She made a deal with one of the highest servants of Orcus while still alive, and the unique magnetic field of the house makes this contract pretty much indestructible. She willingly accepted the terms, driven by despair, of course, but a demon doesn't care about that. Trying to leave the limits of the farm, or sometimes even thinking about it, makes my skin burn, Pandora explained, like it was no big deal. It's unbearable. I wish I could just be dissipated, you guys. Non-existence would be bliss to me. I felt sad about the idea of her not existing, but of course it would be so much more merciful to her than living in this miserable half-life, feeding on raw chicken and attacking monsters. I see that you've been secretly researching it, and of course I don't know everything there is to know, even regarding witchcraft, but I do know this. There are only 2 ways to free Pandora, and she already knows them. But one is worse than her current situation, and the other is nearly infeasible, Lakota explained. I blushed. I didn't want Pandora to know that I'd been buying obscure ebooks on the internet to try finding a ritual to free her from Orcus, and failing. Can I hear them anyway? Lakota then nodded and disclosed them. Here's what I learned from her long explanation. Pandora either had to ask Orcus to break this deal and have a different one, but he'd give her something even worse, or have someone take her place under very specific conditions. A few nights after the Colonel's army raid, something very unpleasant started to happen. Stupid teenagers learned of my haunted property, and daring their friends to trespass became a common trend. Of course, one thing was harming invaders that came to hurt me or take my soul, but it would be too cruel and too troublesome if my personal demon slashed some dumb 16-year-olds that meant no harm. It was really fortunate that, while in town that day, I heard some kids talking about going to my property at night. That way I could prepare Pandora not to kill them. There's a fucking warning, Melinda. If they can't comply with some simple thing that is none of their business, they're better off dead. They're not bad, they're just dickheads, I replied. All these months living together really got me used to expressing myself like a thug. Can't you just scare them? I don't know. Just do the non-lethal things you'd do if I had overnight visitors. I agree we should teach them a lesson, but not too harsh. These little shits are thrilled to experience a haunted house, right? Oh, I'll haunt them all right. She smiled, then yelled, Burnface! Tonight's the night you shine! Burnface materialized before me, and I retched. I half knew what to expect, because when we watched a Batman movie, Pandora said, he looks like Burnface, but cuter. About Two-Face. Still, nothing could have prepared me for how horribly deformed his face was. And not only his face, every visible inch of his body was full of terrible burns and open scars, like he was made of pinkish lava after it hectically condensed. and he smelled horribly of charred skin and rotted flesh. "Pardon me," I managed, covering my mouth and nose. "Go, but don't run too wild," Pandora ordered, and from the smell I knew he had left. "I know you're feeling super bad because you're a pathetic cutie pie, but he's used to these reactions. He even grew to like them. Makes him feel powerful or whatever." Pathetic cutie pie was one of the loveliest things she had ever called me. "I wish he went to the fucking light already," I retorted finally, able to breathe properly again. "Oh, don't worry about him. Burnface is having the time of his life. But now that you know how ghosts work, you might want to have a word or two with some others." Burnface was a total rock star, making the trespassing teens pee themselves in fear. What I considered a fair manner to be taught a lesson, and to think before they willingly put themselves into a potentially dangerous situation again. But youth is a curse, and it's contagious. Finding the exact thrill that they had been looking for, the news spread like wildfire, and my house became a hot spot for all the biggest assholes between the ages of 14 and 17. So for the next month, there was a ruckus in my property almost every single night. I had to increase slightly the use of non-lethal force, like making them trip and fall face first into cow shit, or else I'd just be running an amusement park attraction for free. Never a dull moment on this accursed farm. This seemed to be finally curbing their obsession with Sioux Manor, but one of these nights, things almost ended tragically. The captain showed up for the second of his yearly visits, right as the young dumb fucks were being scared off by Burnface, Legless Linda, Flying Head Stu, and even mechanically challenged Rob. A fat ghost that licked everything he saw and almost drowned you in saliva. He sucked for real battles, but was great to chase people away. Those that were trespassing my property that night had no idea of the true horror they were experiencing and how close to being reduced to nothingness they were. Luckily, Pandora single-handedly defeated the Soul Eater once again. He wasn't as strong as he was scary. Still, I was always terrified when I heard the sound of him approaching. Just listening to his heavy footsteps, or remembering the glimpse I caught from his face the other time, was enough to send me into a panic attack and nearly crush my mind. On my previous entries, I've been relatively laid back about my otherworldly visitors because most things are just bizarre, and I know that Pandora can always handle them. But this unnatural creature was one of the most horrific things that my mind could conceive, and its danger was overwhelmingly real. I'd feel so guilty and angry if the captain caught one of the foolish teenagers, and not being able to do anything but lay in my bed and wait made me horribly anxious. I'm ashamed to say, but I broke down that night. Hey, it's okay, sweetie. Old lady immediately made me know she was nearby. As I trembled under the blanket, the already familiar presence helped a little bit. Can I ask you a favor? Anything I can help you with, as long as it's within my reach, she replied, solicitous. Can you tell me what brought you here, or anything you remember about yourself when you were alive? I felt a gentle pressure over my hand, like she was grabbing it with her too. She reminded me a lot of my late grandmother in this sense. Of course, dear. There isn't much to tell, but I'll be glad to share it with you if that's what you want. She slightly raised her voice to superimpose the uproar outside. I hear most people are here for bad reasons, but I'm just passing the time until my son returns from the Vietnam War. But didn't you know? It's fine, darling. People insist that the war has been over for a long time, and everyone have already returned if they could. But he's always been a forgetful boy, and so clumsy, the poor thing. That's why I need to be patient. She sighed and paused. Maybe he has passed too, but that's all the more reason to wait so we can cross together. He'll come, I'm sure. A mother's heart knows. I used my other hand to squeeze the air where I imagined hers to be. That night, when Pandora came home to tell me it was safe to leave the bed, she asked if we had a moment to talk, something that had never happened before. You see me with two kind eyes, but I have to burst this bubble for you, Rumi. You should know that I killed the previous owner of the house. It took me a while to process it. As far as I know, Mr. Liu was an old widow, beloved by the community, if a little eccentric, and he was very fond of the Sioux Manor. That's why he refused to leave such a dangerous place and go stay with his relatives. Did you have a good reason for it? Was he bad to you? She laughed. You really think that whatever I do is justified, don't you? If I tell you that I just ate a puppy, you'd say, okay, I guess the puppy was actually Cerberus. I just know you're smart enough to not act senselessly, I retorted, without hesitation. Pandora seemed shocked. Well, you're surprisingly right this time. You do realize that the farm was extremely cheap for a creepy property, right? Old Lou's family wanted to get rid of it as soon as possible because their dad was murdered. Pandora sucked at explanations, so she just picked an icy and fluffy memory from her head and implanted it in mine. The stream was completely different from the other. It was somewhat blurry and poorly lit, like something recorded on a cheap disposable camera. I watched Mr. Liu, a likable old man, limping slowly around the property. These days he had an employee to run the farm, because he himself couldn't do much. The man, around 40 years old, and always wearing a cowboy hat, took care of the animals and helped them in some tasks around the house too. Like basic cleaning and cooking, but he wasn't allowed to stay the night. Mr. Liu treated Pandora with an awkward gentleness, like she was an estranged daughter he had been recently reconnecting with. Since she didn't have a name, he called her Girl. Not very imaginative. I watched in horror as Mr. Liu uncovered his head when he heard the heavy footsteps entering his bedroom. Goofy Voice had told me that the old man didn't leave the bed when it was likely that something bad would show up, because he couldn't escape quickly anymore. But it seems that, assuming that he was almost dying anyway, Mr. Liu's curiosity took the best of him, and he decided to steal a glimpse from the aberration that had chased and intrigued him over the last decade. He let out a hideous scream. The captain was a giant, animalistic black smudge that somewhat merged with natural shadow on its surroundings, consuming everything. The horrid ghoul let out a satisfied roar when it realized Mr. Liu was trying to take a peek at him. With atrocious, unavoidable speed, it caught him and started eating, suctioning, his leg. It started disappearing completely, leaving no blood or chewed bones behind. Pandora smashed his protege's head to kill him before he was completely devoured, so at least his soul could be saved. After that, the chaos ensued. The employee found Mr. Liu's body the next morning, and thank God he had a solid alibi for the time of death. Besides, There was nothing to inherit but the property, so the cowboy didn't profit from his boss's demise. Mr. Liu's family hated the house with all their might, even more now that they suspected it had killed him. So they decided to sell it for pennies, and that's how I ended up here. The next morning, I let Pandora know I watched everything, and she did the best that she could. She brushed it off. Thinking about it, that's pretty much how Legless Linda died. She hates her nephew's guts because she thinks he murdered her, but it was just us trying to save her partially. That's awful. Have you told her that? Of course, dum-dum. But she won't believe me, even after seeing old Glue suffering from a similar fate. You should have realized by now that the ghosts here are all biased and stubborn. I had a somber look on my face. She then added, "Cheer up, sunshine. You might die from that too. But I'm getting more powerful, so I'll probably only fail to save your feet." After Lakota patiently clarified all my doubts about the Sioux Manor, I finally understood why the captain returned from time to time. Unlike our ghosts, who still belong to the material realm, the captain and other entities like him belong to an outer plane. So even if Pandora slashed him to bits, he'd just reform on his natal plane, hell, abyss, or something like that, after a while. But having Pandora and the other resident ghosts around to protect me, I was able to deal with even that. There was only one thing in the world that I couldn't handle, and it hit me like lightning the day after the captain came. An unknown number called me. I figured that maybe some door-to-door salesman saw my warning sign by the gate and wanted to be allowed in. Or even one of the kids' parents calling to apologize. It wouldn't be the first time for both things. It was his sister. I can't bring myself to say the name of my ex-fiancé because it makes me tremble, so forgive me for not reproducing her every word here. Hi, Melinda. Are you with him? Why would I be? I replied, somewhat harshly. I used to be friends with this woman, but when I told her about the aggression, she was dismissive and said that all the couples were like that. She's the reason why it took me so long to ask my parents for help. Because my brother said he would like to make things right with you, and now no one has seen or spoken to him in over a week.
Asking Pandora if he had been on the property was one of the hardest things I've ever done. At first I started describing him physically, but then the next thing I knew I was crying in her arms as I told her how he slapped until I said his name, and begged for forgiveness every little time I made a small mistake, or anything he considered to be wrong. I saw you quivering in fear every time you dropped a glass or something. You apologizing frantically for that, even if there was no one there. So yeah, no need to tell me anything else if you don't want to, she said awkwardly, and ran her fingers through my hair. So has he been here? Have you killed him? I asked, panicking for a million different reasons. Oh, hell no. He's still here. I'm keeping him under the hen house. A cozy spot for some torture, as you would see from my review. I'm breaking him nice and slowly. Shit, Pandora. I can be arrested for that. You know the police won't just believe that a dead person did it. It's fine, Rumi. He's the one who tried breaking into your house to kill you, and to do worse things too. I was completely freaking out, and nothing she could say would ever make it better. His sister had told me that she had called the cops on me, so they would search my farm. You don't mind, right? Her voice dripped the same venom as his did every time he hurt me. If he's not there, you're just a good cooperative citizen. I hate this bitch with all my might, but that isn't the point. Will you kill him? Of course I'll kill him, and then probably revive him to suffer more and kill him again, she replied coldly. I might be cool, but you keep forgetting that I love to make humans feel pain, especially when they're such horrible assholes. I urged Pandora to think this through. What if he dies and becomes tied to the house forever? Will it be so much worse than having him live? Why the fuck didn't you tell me he showed up? I really didn't think I'd have to worry you about him, being here and all. I didn't want you to relive all the abuse. You have a beautiful and strong demon to take care of such things to you, after all. She was too laid back about it. But now you made it all worse, I yelled, exasperated. You might be a demon and have your damn rules, but you can't make the rest of the world bow to it. I'm so fucked up. There's no way I can claim self-defense if he even did come near me. I don't give a fuck about what little shitty laws you humans created. I give a fuck about protecting you, she replied. And I wanted to say, okay, let's think it over. Let's figure a way to deal with this. There must be a way out. But I was too far gone in my panic and despair. Just like I knew I grew apart from all my friends. They begged me to leave, and I got angry at them. I downplayed the abuse because those things didn't happen to women like me, right? Educated, middle class, strong-willed women like me. It only happens to vulnerable girls who didn't know better, right? Just like when I cut contact with my parents to a minimum because it hurt to lie that everything was fine. It did hurt to be asked how my day was, and being unable to think of a single nice thing to say. Just like when I cut my hair and threw away all my makeup so he wouldn't have reasons to feel jealous of me. Just like when I yelled at my neighbor because she called the police on him. I said that it was none of her business and that all couples are like that. Just like when I started hurting myself to punish me for not leaving and not taking my first opportunity to be helped. I was too far gone into my trauma, into my pain, into the ugliest part of me that he so thoroughly fed. Is that so? I didn't sound like me. I was so bitter, so angry, so utterly unable to act like myself. Because ever since I moved in, you've been a total bitch and treated me poorly, so fuck you. I never asked to get a cursed poltergeist trying to boss me into my every move. This is serious, and I don't want to rot in prison, so this time, I'm not sitting around and letting you do as you please. Fuck you, and all you humans. You piece of shits are all the same. You think you're some shit. But you'll live another 50 more years, 60 tops, and when you turn to fucking dust and manure, I'll still be here, and I'll have things my way. Then I hope you disappear, I retorted. I wanted to stop myself. I was being childish, on top of everything. But I couldn't. Not in that moment. Right then, I was the frail, the loser, the pitiful person that he had convinced me that I was. Great, because that would be the fucking ray of sunshine in my miserable eternal life. She made 2 heavy thuds as she took off her shoes. One of the many pairs I gave her and dematerialized. So have it your way, you stupid bitch. I'm turning off my telepathy and going dormant because I'm too fucking mad and I don't want to recklessly hurt you. I know what you're going to say. This is too out of character for you, Melinda. Considering all that's happened so far, there's no way that you're this dumb. You're better than that. You're lucky to not know firsthand that when it comes to our abusers, sometimes we'll display incoherent and self-destructive behaviors, and coming back from it's not linear. You're broken in a way that no matter how good of a job you do to mend yourself, you're forever at risk of snapping again. The risk can be small, but it's there, and given enough pressure, it's unavoidable. You're lucky to not know that a piece of your abuser grows on you like a parasite, and it becomes pretty much a ghost limb, acting up and hurting yourself every now and then. My irrational behavior came from a place of fear, from manipulation, and from hating myself for having been manipulated. When you feel like that, it's hard to do anything but act on belief, so carefully seated into your heart that your abuser will be in control, and you're just a sad Pavlov dog. I'm not. I am strong. I am a survivor. But it didn't keep me from freaking out and decided to go to the hen house before the police arrived. It didn't keep from having mixed feelings when I saw him, his throat ripped off and his vocal cords all destroyed so he could never again scream at me. His face filthy with chicken crap and dried blood. Does he really deserve it? Isn't it my fault that I accepted to be hurt? Isn't it my fault that I'm too clumsy and incompetent? I am strong. I am a survivor. But I'm also the woman who made the worst possible choice at that moment. I set him free. I didn't release him because I'm weak or forgiving. I've admitted that my lingering trauma played a big part in my decision. But here's what the rational part of my brain said. He might be getting a deal with Orcus right now. And boy, was I right. As soon as I pulled him from the space under the hen house and went outside again, there was a giant figure towering over me. Even the vision of its back was enough to terrify someone like me, who considered herself to be used to the creepy and supernatural. Still with its back, nearly naked and completely scarred, turned to the hennery. The fat pig of a demon that bounded Pandora to this godforsaken place rotated its neck to watch me, with a smile that was both cruel and delighted. Seeing it in person instead of only in a memory was a sensorial overload. I'll never get over its stink, how it moved like a legged ooze, how its whole skin was made of infected blisters, its voices, its wrongness. Have you ever seen a being and thought, this shouldn't exist? This is not only an aberration, but a proof that there's no God looking after us. This is how I felt about the captain. This thing right in front of me was a whole nother level. He was outraged. Apparently, the demonic envoy had given his voice back partially so that they could make a deal. Come on, you rabid bitch. Tell this fatso who he's messing with. He spitted his words in a rage. Lovely words to say about the being who granted you the ability to speak, and to the person who just freed you from a life of having chickens shitting all over you. And he didn't stop. Fucking tramp, you'll always ruin everything. Can't you ever do anything right? Can you? The demon patiently read from a scroll. Let's make a bet. If she leaves you here to perish, I'll release you myself and guide you to the house where you can kill her as you please. But if she shows up within the next 3 hours, I win. She wins. I'll rip you apart piece by piece and eat your soul. The scroll did have a blood stain that was clearly a fingerprint, But he wasn't worried about the 9 feet tall, otherworldly creature and the deal he made with it. He was worried about destroying me. "You'd better start saying my name and begging that I forgive you." And through everything, I smiled. "You know, I spent all this time thinking that I couldn't say your name because I'm scared of you. But it's just that. No, I won't say your name, ever again, because I refuse to acknowledge you as a person." The demon spit on his forehead, and it wounded him like a bullet. He whimpered. He was then punched repeatedly until the 2 of them were inside the hennery again. The demon held his head against the chicken crap and used his face to smudge it, laughing maniacally. The demon didn't care who it was, as long as there was someone suffering. And luckily, through all my bad choices and regrets, the someone wasn't me or a person that I cared to protect. I watched it torture him for long minutes, and even decided to record it with my phone for good measure. Pandora had explained to me that powerful outsiders like this demon can't choose to make themselves invisible for some people while visible to others. That's why the time kind of stopped when she made her pact with it. I knew that the demon wanted me to see it, all to maximize his humiliation. So I let it put on a show for me. Things started to get troublesome when it started whipping its fiery tail against the old, dry, and very flammable hennery door. Without thinking it through, I jumped inside to save my chickens. The demon mistakenly thought I was interfering with its job. "Just watch it quietly, fool," its thunderous, disgusting voice roared. It was just a small slap. It was just throwing me out of the way. But the thing was an emissary working under Orcus himself, and I was just an average woman. As my lacerated abdomen bled enough to leave me unconscious in a matter of seconds, I smiled weakly, and I counted the chickens. At least I was able to evacuate all of them. I don't know for how long I blacked out. I just know that when I came to again, I was dying in her arms, as she spoke to him, still being devoured bit by the demon. "Oh, you're scared? Scared enough to beg a winged woman you don't know to save you?" she chuckled, talking to him as she held me. "You deserve to be the way more terrified for all the hell you've put Melinda through. Consider yourself lucky you're only getting a painful death once. If it was me, I'd murder you hundreds of times." "She's strong now because of me," he mumbled pathetically. Pandora laughed again. "You don't make her stronger. You tried to destroy her, and it's all on her that she's still standing, that she's still kind, that she held on to every good thing you tried to take from her, that she became an even better version of herself, that she's the woman I love and am proud of." I wanted to pretend I wasn't hearing, but the tears started streaming from my eyes. "Hey, Rumi, you're up," she said softly. Just then I realized she'd ripped off a piece of her left wing to staunch my bleeding. "I've been thinking about something you asked me once." Yeah? "If you ever got married and have kids, I'd protect your babies. I'd protect your guy too. But if he pissed me off, I'd draw little dicks on his forehead." I tried to squeeze her hand, but I realized my body was too weak to do it. Every surface of Pandora that I could see was covered in my blood. "Sorry it took me a while to come get you. If I go dormant, the other ghosts go too, because I'm their boss. So I tried to stop being mad quickly. I punched a few holes in the walls." Although the pain was unbearable, I smiled. "Sorry I stormed out like that. I was scared." I feebly apologized. I didn't want to die without doing so. Yeah, girlfriend, I was scared too in a sense. But I guess even scared you were able to figure out something that I couldn't. And hey, now we're in a kind of a pinch and I can't solve myself. Are those stupid officers coming? I need someone with a body and able to leave the property to get you to a hospital. The fat demon continued eating the last bits of his body, carelessly paying no mind to Pandora or me. Soon, he was going to be a miserable head, and then completely erased from existence. The hennery is on fire, so I guess the neighbors will notice it all soon, I replied. It was also hot as hell where we stood. But I don't know if I can make it until they come. Let me tell you a little something about being physically hurt by a demon. The problem is not your body, but your soul. You're surviving because you have a strong soul. She put her hand on my sweaty forehead. But I don't know if it's strong enough to make it through completely. I'm sorry for dying on you, Pandora. Although, there must be a way, she hesitantly added. Circumstance number 1. The person had to be entirely familiar with the terms of the contract, word by word. I saw her memory in my sleep over and over, and I can recite every word from it. Circumstance number 2. The person has to be alive and unbounded by other contracts. I'm a freelance writer. My mortgage was put under my parents' name. They insisted their credit score was better, so I'd get to save some money. Circumstance number 3. The person has to be willingly not only to take Pandora's place, but to become Pandora herself. This one is easy. I feel that we're so connected that we're already part of each other. Circumstance number 4. The person has to agree that Pandora takes the person's name and life for herself. And there's nothing I'd like more than to have her live a normal life, at least for a few decades. Circumstance number 5. The person must have been touched by the bearer of the contract. So there we have it. The final requisite. All this time, I didn't want your morals to get close to me, because I know you're reckless. I feared someone would offer to take my place, having no idea what it means, but what? But letting you take my place to save your soul is different. So let us do it, I said softly. Despite her magical tourniquet, I was fading again. You stupid fuck. You know what that means for you, right? Forever. Or the rest of eternity. You're damned and a slave to Orcus. Pandora, I lived a fulfilling life. I had loving parents. I liked my job. I got this great farm and was able to meet you and all the others. Even mentally challenged Rob. We both chuckled. I don't have big dreams or plans, but I don't want this life to go to waste. So please, let me offer you a little kindness to make up for all the horrible things you went through. You'll be chained to this house forever. Yeah, but you get to be free. Plus, I quite like this place. She hesitated for a while, then smiled. Well, I do think you'd make a great leader of the ghosts. I have so many ideas. Anyway, how do we do it? That's pretty cheesy, but you know how they say that every time you kiss someone, you two exchange a piece of your souls. It's like that. She leaned towards my face like Prince Charming, giving me the kiss of immortality, and we held hands as we swapped. It's been 2 years now. My soul could take the wound, but my poor body still ended up with a nasty scar. Luckily, it didn't take long for a few neighbors to come and get us help. I used to be someone a long time ago, but then I lost the right to have a name, and then she came and named me Pandora. Now I inhabit a body named Melinda, the body of the prettiest, strongest, weirdest woman I've ever met. I left the farm for the first time in forever to go to the hospital, and I've been leaving it daily. Even the most mundane tasks like grocery shopping amazes me. I just make sure to never spend too much time away from my savior. Not because she'll get lonely, but because I will. I'm working on my rage because it is such a waste to treat poorly the life she so kindly gave me. Thanks to her, I look forward to both living and to one day, in a few decades, finally dying and finding the rest of the other side. Although we won't break the curse, I think we at least weakened it, because 2 things changed. The first is that she doesn't have to survive on raw chicken. We think that it's because she kind of died protecting a few dozen chickens, but she can eat pretty much anything now. Of course, I've been improving my cooking skills so she can dine like a queen. It's the least I can do for her. The second is, part of the original deal was that I was forgotten, but now she's in my place, and I'll never forget her. Now I, the former raw chicken eating demon, am a writer with a mortgage, and she, Melinda, I, the most amazing woman that ever lived, has hooves and fights against invaders. You should see how cool she is. Fighting with 2 kookaries. She's better than me. So much that she has gained the favor of the other shamans and even convinced many of the ghosts to go to the light, including the former slaves. Of course, more will always come, but they will be in good hands. It's funny how you can be broken in a million pieces and still find someone who's broken too, but whose pieces match yours completely. Melinda likes to say we saved each other, but she's the one who saved me. She's the one who saves everyone. And when I die, she'll still be here, taking care of whoever erratically walks around this place like a fallen angel. Maybe you humans were right in your fairy tales, and true love actually can break curses somehow. Or maybe she's always been more than human. My beautiful demon wife.
Chronicler here. We here at Creepy Spaghet would like to thank Poloniumpoisoning for allowing us to tell their story. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe to stay updated on these terrible tales, and make sure to check out the author in the links below. If you're interested in having your story narrated, be sure to reach out to our humble overseer, as he continues his journey to pull the darkest stories from the infinite depths of the internet. Until next time, fiends, and remember, we are darkness.